The morning I decided to ruin my mother's plans, the sky over Seattle was the color of old pewter, heavy, unapologetic, and indifferent to what anyone wanted from it. I sat across from her at the breakfast table in our family home on Magnolia Bluff, watching her slice her grapefruit with the precision of someone who had never once in her life done anything without purpose. My mother, Vivian Carter, did not eat grapefruit because she liked it. She ate it because her nutritionist said it preserved collagen, and collagen preservation was part of the project she called herself. "The Hargrove family is expecting your answer by Friday," she said without looking up. I poured my coffee. "No." She set down her knife. That was how I knew I had her attention, not by the sound of her voice, but by the absence of sound. The sudden stillness that preceded the storm. Emily. Just my name. One word. The same way a judge reads a verdict. I said, "No, Mother. I'm not marrying Preston Hargrove." Preston Hargrove was 51 years old, twice divorced, and the heir to a commercial real estate empire that had been quietly acquiring half the Pacific Northwest for 2 decades. He had the teeth of someone who had spent a lot of money on the impression of good teeth, and he had looked at me at the charity auction where we'd been formally introduced, the way men like him always looked at women like me, as if I were a line item in a portfolio, a strategic asset, appreciated but impersonal. My mother wanted that merger. She had wanted it for 3 years, and she had finally decided that the cleanest vehicle for it was me. "You will be 40 in 7 years, she said. "I'm 33, which means the window is narrowing." She picked up her knife again. "Preston is generous, established, and his family has agreed to a postnuptial structure that protects Carter Holdings in the event of—" "I don't care about the postnuptial structure." "You should. I won't marry a man I don't respect for a merger I didn't ask to be part of." I set down my cup. "And if you push this, I will find my own solution." She looked at me then. Really looked at me. There was something behind her eyes. Not anger, exactly. Something more calculated than anger. The look of someone adjusting a strategy. "You wouldn't dare," she said. She was wrong. I found Daniel Mercer through a classified listing. That sounds absurd in retrospect, but at the time it made a kind of cold sense to me. I needed a man my mother would find absolutely disqualifying. Not someone reckless or unkind, I wasn't cruel, but someone who existed so far outside Vivian Carter's taxonomy of acceptable men that the marriage alone would be a declaration of war. The listing was for a handyman service. Mercer Home and Auto Repairs. Honest work. Fair rates. References available. I wasn't looking for a handyman. I was sitting in a coffee shop on Capitol Hill, killing time before a meeting, idly reading through local small business ads with the unfocused energy of someone whose mind is elsewhere. But when I called the number and heard his voice low, even, unhurried, I made an appointment I had no intention of keeping for the purpose it was advertised. When Daniel Mercer showed up at my apartment 2 days later, he was exactly what I had hoped for, and somehow not at all what I expected. He was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than a gym membership. He wore a gray Henley, with a small tear at the collar, and work boots that had seen better years. His hair was dark, cut practically short, and there was a faint scar above his left eyebrow that he clearly had no story about, or at least no story he felt the need to share. He assessed my apartment the way a professional assesses a space, quickly, thoroughly, without comment, and he had brought his daughter. She was maybe 5 years old, with his dark hair and enormous brown eyes, wearing a yellow rain jacket with a duck on the pocket. She stood behind his leg with her hand wrapped in his, very solemnly studying my entryway. "Sorry," he said. "My sitter canceled. I can reschedule if—" "No," I surprised myself. "It's fine." Her name was Lily. She said nothing for the first 20 minutes, sitting on a stool in my kitchen with a small book, while her father checked the water pressure in my bathroom. Then, without preamble, she held up the book and said, "This is about a turtle who builds a house." "Is it a good house?" I asked. "It falls down twice," she said, very seriously. "But the third time is good." I thought about that for the rest of the week. I approached Daniel with the proposal on a Tuesday evening. in the parking lot of a grocery store, which is not the setting anyone imagines for the beginning of a marriage. I had rehearsed a version of it that sounded businesslike and rational. What came out of my mouth was messier than that. I told him the truth. My mother was engineering my life. I needed to be married to someone she would never accept. It would be an arrangement, legal but not real, cohabitation but not intimacy, a finite agreement with a financial settlement at the end. I would handle all the costs. I just needed his name on a license and his presence at a wedding. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You want to marry a stranger to make your mother angry," he said. "To make her plans collapse," I said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I didn't answer that. He looked down at the parking lot. Then, "I have a daughter." "I know. Any arrangement involves her life too. Her routine. Her stability. I understand that. I wouldn't disrupt. You'd be living in the same space." He said it plainly. Not as a challenge. Just a fact being laid out for consideration. She'd know you. She'd form impressions. Kids do. "I know." Another silence. The parking lot lights came on overhead. Somewhere, a car alarm sounded briefly, then stopped. 3 years, he said finally. "And I want it in writing." "Of course. And Lily's schedule doesn't change. Her school, her routines, her doctor. None of that moves." "Agreed." He nodded once, slowly, like someone signing something in their mind. "All right," he said. "I'll marry you." I should have felt triumphant. Instead I felt, for reasons I couldn't identify, something closer to apprehension. The wedding was small, deliberate, and devastating, which was exactly what I had intended. City Hall on a Wednesday. Daniel in a dark jacket that fit him well, which surprised me. Lily in a white dress with yellow embroidery, holding a single daisy, which surprised me more. My mother attended because I had told her I was getting married, and she assumed correctly that it was to Preston. When she saw Daniel, her face went through several stages that I had anticipated intellectually but found more satisfying than I'd expected in person. Then it collapsed into something I hadn't anticipated. Contempt so thorough it was almost abstract. She didn't make a scene. Vivienne Carter didn't do scenes. She simply stood there in her gray Chanel suit, her jaw precisely set, and watched the civil ceremony with the expression of someone watching a very expensive vase fall from a very high shelf. Afterward, in the parking structure, she took my arm gently and said, quietly, "You have no idea what you've done to yourself." "For once," I said, "I've done something for myself." She released my arm. She walked back to her car. She didn't look back. I stood in the gray concrete stairwell, alone for a moment, and felt the full strange weight of what I had just done settle around me. I had married a man I barely knew to win a fight with my mother, and across the parking lot, that man was crouching down to fix the small daisy back into Lily's hair, murmuring something to her that made her laugh. I told myself, this is a transaction, nothing else. I was already starting to be wrong. The house was small. That was the first thing I recalibrated. I had agreed to move into Daniel's home rather than have him uproot Lily. This was one of my concessions, and I had made it without thinking through what it meant practically. His house was a craftsman bungalow in Beacon Hill. 2 bedrooms. A porch that sagged slightly on the left side. A kitchen, with appliances that were clean but clearly old, and a backyard that backed up to a chain-link fence, beyond which someone had planted aggressively cheerful sunflowers. My apartment in First Hill had been 1,200 square feet with a view of the Sound. I had a walk-in closet and a sub-zero refrigerator and a bathroom with heated floors. Daniel's bathroom did not have heated floors. I brought 4 suitcases and left the rest in storage. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself this every morning for the first 2 weeks, while I stood in the narrow shower and listened to Lily singing to herself in the next room. We had agreed, separate bedrooms. He took the primary. I took what had been a study, which he had cleared out with a completeness that told me he had done it carefully and in advance. The room was small but orderly, and he had put a lamp on the desk that had warm light. And I thought about that lamp, sometimes the small deliberateness of it. My mother called every other day. The conversations followed a pattern. "How is your handyman?" "He's well, thank you." "Have you lost your mind, Emily?" "Completely and permanently?" "Probably. Preston Hargrove has moved on. He's in discussions with the Caldwell girl." "Good for them. Your father would be." "My father isn't here." A pause. "Neither are we having this conversation anymore today." I would hang up, and then I would sit at the kitchen table and drink coffee and listen to the sound of Daniel in the garage, working, and Lily asking him questions about whatever he was doing, and his patient, low voice explaining. He was patient in a way that I had not expected, not passive patient. There's a difference. Passive people let the world move around them and offer nothing in return. Daniel moved deliberately, spoke when he had something to say, and listened with an attention that was unusual. When Lily asked him something, he answered her completely, as if the question deserved the full weight of his consideration. When she interrupted him, he paused, listened, resumed. I observed this the way I observed most things in those early weeks. From a careful distance. As if it were data rather than something that affected me. But I noticed things. I noticed that he read financial documents at the kitchen table, after Lily was asleep. Not newspapers, not novels, financial documents. Dense ones, with tables and projections. I noticed that when the local news ran a segment on a commercial development project in Sodu, he muted the television, but didn't look away from the screen until the segment ended. I noticed that his phone rang with calls he stepped outside to take, and that the conversations when I caught fragments involved numbers too large for a handyman's vocabulary. I told myself, everyone has complexity. Don't invent a mystery. One evening, about 3 weeks in, I made the mistake of trying to reconcile my freelance invoices at the kitchen table while Daniel was making dinner. I was a financial consultant. The irony of my profession versus my current living situation was not lost on me, and I had 3 client files open and a spreadsheet that was behaving badly. "You have a circular reference in column G," Daniel said, not looking up from the stove. I stopped. "What?" He glanced at the screen. "Your depreciation formula is referencing itself through the allocation column. It'll loop until it errors out." I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at him. "How do you?" I started. "I used to work with these kinds of models," he said, simply. He turned back to the stove. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said. "I've got it. I fixed the formula." It took me 4 minutes to find what he had identified in 4 seconds. I did not ask him about it. I wasn't ready to. Lily told me things without meaning to. This was not something I had prepared for. I had factored in her presence, her schedule, her needs, her emotional landscape as logistics. What I had not factored in was that children simply say things, unburdened by the social contract that tells adults to be careful. On a Saturday morning, about 5 weeks in, she was drawing at the kitchen table while I read and Daniel was outside doing something to the porch railing. She was drawing what appeared to be a very large building. "What's that?" I asked. "Daddy's old building," she said. "Daddy has a building?" "Had," she said, with the careful precision of a child who has been corrected on tense before. "He used to own big buildings. Then things got bad, and we moved here." She colored in a window. "Daddy says it's better here because nobody bothers us." I kept my voice level. "What kind of buildings?" She shrugged with the complete indifference of a 5-year-old who has run out of interest in a topic. "Big ones." "Can you pass the blue?" I passed her the blue crayon. I thought about what she'd said for the rest of the day. I turned it over and examined it, and told myself it was nothing, a child's imprecise memory of adult events she didn't understand. But it sat in my mind like a stone in a shoe. Small. Unavoidable. Changing the way I walked. The car came on a Thursday. I was coming back from a client meeting when I saw it idling in front of the house. A black Mercedes S-Class, current year, spotless. Not the kind of car that ended up on our block by accident. A man in a dark jacket stood beside it, waiting. And when Daniel came out of the garage wiping his hands on a cloth, the two of them had a conversation I couldn't hear from where I'd parked. The man handed Daniel an envelope. Daniel opened it, read whatever was inside, and handed it back. He said something brief. The man nodded, got back in the car, and drove away. Daniel went back into the garage. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching the space where the Mercedes had been. Then I went inside and didn't say anything, because I didn't know yet what to say. My mother's annual gala was something I had been dreading since the wedding. The Carter Foundation Spring Benefit was less a charity event than a performance of a particular kind of power, one that Vivienne Carter staged annually with the precision of someone who had confused philanthropy with warfare. She invited me. She invited Daniel. The subtext of the invitation was not subtle. Come and see what you gave up. Come and see what your choice looks like next to the real thing. I brought Daniel because backing down felt worse than going. He wore a dark suit he had not told me he owned. It fit him exactly. I did not comment on this. The event was held at a hotel on Fifth Avenue, one of those spaces designed to make you feel the weight of accumulated money just by breathing its air. The ceilings were high. The floral arrangements were tall enough to obscure people standing behind them, and everything was the particular shade of cream that announces this was not cheap. We were barely inside when the first thing happened. A security guard, polished, young, with the specific expression of someone who has been given a small amount of power and is committed to maximizing it, stepped in front of Daniel at the entry to the main ballroom. This section is for invited guests, the man said. We are invited guests, I said. The invitation is in Miss Carter's name. Miss Carter is my wife, Daniel said. Quietly. Without inflection, the guard looked at him, looked at me, made a calculation that was visible on his face and unpleasant to watch. He stepped aside, but slowly, we found our table. My mother's positioning of it told me everything. Near the back, beside a service door, between two tables of people I'd never met who were clearly there as filler, the message was architectural. This is where you belong now. Daniel sat with the ease of a man who was comfortable in his own body regardless of where that body happened to be. And I found this simultaneously admirable and confusing. Midway through the cocktail hour, my mother arrived at our table. She brought with her the specific energy of someone who has been preparing a remark. Emily, she said. Then to Daniel, with the bright warmth of absolute contempt. And you must be the repairman. Daniel, he said. He didn't stand. He didn't correct her tone. He just said his name. Of course. She touched my shoulder with the lightness of someone branding livestock. I do hope you're enjoying the evening. This must all be very new for you. She gestured vaguely at the room, the chandeliers, the guests in their evening wear, the infrastructure of a certain kind of life. Daniel looked at her calmly. It's a nice room, he said. Nothing else, just that. I watched my mother wait for something she could use: embarrassment, defensiveness, aggression, any reaction that would let her establish the terms of the exchange. Daniel gave her nothing. He picked up his water glass and drank from it, and looked at the room with the mild interest of a man in no particular hurry to be anywhere. My mother, for perhaps the first time in my memory, did not know what to do with someone. She moved away, and I sat there looking at the side of Daniel's face and feeling something shift, slowly, in the architecture of what I thought I understood. Later, across the room, I watched Preston Hargrove laughing too loudly with the Caldwell girl. And I felt nothing. Not envy. Not regret. Just the clean absence of something I'd never wanted. I didn't plan to go through his things. That matters to me, in retrospect, though I'm not sure it changes anything. The point is, I wasn't looking. It was 11:30 on a Friday night, 3 days after the gala. Daniel was asleep. Lily was asleep. I had come downstairs for water because I couldn't sleep, and had developed the insomniac's habit of walking through the house in the dark, like a ghost visiting rooms she didn't quite belong to. The filing drawer in the kitchen desk was slightly open. It had been sticking for days. I'd seen Daniel wrestle with it, and in the darkness I misjudged the distance and caught it with my knee. It slid open, and several folders slid with it, fanning across the kitchen floor. I picked them up. I put them back, but my hand stopped. One folder had come open, and even in the low light from the street lamp outside, I could see what was on the first page. A property deed. The address was on the waterfront, a mixed-use development I recognized because I'd driven past it a dozen times, because it was one of the largest private construction projects in Seattle's central waterfront in the past 15 years. The name on the deed was not Daniel Mercer. It was DJM Capital Holdings, LLC. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, holding the folder, listening to the house breathe around me. I opened the next folder, and the next. By the time I had gone through 6 of them, my hands were steady but my pulse was not. Because here is what I found. In that stack of folders, in that small kitchen in a house that did not look like money, in a neighborhood that did not announce wealth, commercial properties in Pioneer Square, a stake in a mixed-use development on the waterfront, 2 parcels in South Lake Union that were listed for development, a capital structure document showing equity positions in 3 separate real estate ventures, a quarterly report from something called Cascade Pacific Investments with DJM Capital listed as a primary investor. The numbers were not the numbers of a man who repaired cars and fixed porches. The numbers were the numbers of a man who had been quietly, methodically accumulating one of the most significant private real estate portfolios in the Pacific Northwest. I put the folders back. I went upstairs. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought, who did I marry? I asked him on a Sunday morning, while Lily was at a friend's birthday party and the house was quiet. I put the folder on the kitchen table. Not accusatorially, I tried for that, but my voice came out rougher than I intended. I found this by accident. Tell me what it is. He looked at the folder. Then, at me. He made coffee. He brought 2 cups to the table and sat down, and for a moment I thought he was going to deflect, or deny, or manage it the way powerful men manage disclosure, parceling out truth like they're doing you a favor. Instead, he just told me. His full name was Daniel James Mercer. He had built his first company in his mid-20s, a property acquisition firm that identified undervalued commercial space in emerging neighborhoods and developed it for mixed-use occupancy. He had scaled it fast, grown it smart, sold a portion at the right moment. He had reinvested. He had done it again. By the time he was 34, DJM Capital was managing a portfolio that made quiet people in real estate circles pay very careful attention. Then his wife, Lily's mother, had died. He said this without drama, without dwelling on it, just a fact, placed on the table alongside the others. She had died 18 months after Lily was born, and in the wreckage of that, Daniel had done what a certain kind of man does when the world becomes unrecognizable. He had retreated into something he could control. He had kept the portfolio but stepped back from its public face. He had structured it through entities and representatives. He had moved to a neighborhood where nobody knew him, put Lily in a school where she was just a kid and not an heir, and built a life that was small enough to hold. I didn't want what goes with the visibility, he said. The networking, the events, the constant performance of a certain kind of success. I'd had that. After Claire died, it felt he stopped. It felt like wearing someone else's clothes. But you kept the investments. They run themselves, mostly. I have a managing partner who handles operations. I review quarterly. I make decisions when they need to be made. He looked at his coffee. I'm not pretending to be poor. I just stopped performing wealth. I thought about the gala, about my mother calling him the repairman, about the security guard, about the look on Daniel's face, through all of it that complete, unperturbed calm, and I understood, suddenly, what that calm had been. Not submission, not defeat. Certainty. The certainty of a man who has nothing to prove because he already knows exactly who he is. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He looked at me directly. You hired me for a specific job, he said. You needed someone your mother would dismiss. I fit the picture. I didn't see a reason to complicate it. You let her humiliate you at that gala. She didn't humiliate me, he said. She tried. There's a difference. I sat with that for a moment. Lily knew, I said. She mentioned buildings. A small, involuntary, almost smile. Kids remember things. She misses them? The old life? She misses having a bigger yard, he said. Mostly she's fine. Kids are fine when you're present. They're not fine when you're wealthy and absent. I learned that early. I looked at the folder on the table. I looked at him. I thought about the lamp he'd put in my room. The careful exactness of it. What happens now? I asked. Whatever you decide, he said. That was always the deal. Vivienne Carter had not survived 40 years in Seattle's financial circles by being slow. Within 2 weeks of the gala, she had hired investigators. I found out because her personal lawyer, a man named Harrison Wade, who I had known since childhood, and who had the practiced neutrality of someone paid to have no opinions, called me to say he needed to discuss certain aspects of your current domestic situation. I told Harrison to tell my mother to call me herself. She called that evening. Your husband, she said, is not what he appears to be. No, I agreed. A pause. She had expected denial. You know, I know, Emily. And now the performance dropped, just slightly, just enough, that I could hear something underneath it that might, under other circumstances, have been concern. Do you understand what kind of man operates this way? Who builds a business through anonymous entities and hides his assets and lives a fiction? A private one, I said. A dangerous one. You hired investigators to dig through my husband's finances. I'm protecting the families. You're protecting a merger that fell apart, I said. That's what you're protecting, not me, not the family. A deal. Silence. I want you to file for divorce, she said. I'll contest the... You'll contest nothing, I said. Because there's nothing to contest. We're legally married. You have no standing. I kept my voice even. I had learned that from watching Daniel. Stop interfering, Mother. She hung up, but I knew her well enough to know that a hung-up phone was not a retreat. It was a tactical pause. The next thing she did was worse, and I only found out about it later. She contacted the managing partner of DJM Capital and informed him incorrectly, maliciously, that Daniel was in the process of a contentious separation that might trigger claims against the portfolio. She implied that a precipitous restructuring might be advisable. She was trying to create instability before Daniel could act. What she didn't know was that Daniel's managing partner, a woman named Sonia Reeves, who had worked with him for 8 years and trusted him the way people trust someone who has never once given them cause not to, called Daniel directly the moment my mother's message arrived. And Daniel, without telling me any of this, responded with the kind of surgical clarity that I would only understand later, watching the whole thing unfold. The Cascade Pacific Development Summit was held quarterly at a hotel conference center in Bellevue. It was the kind of event that mattered in a very specific, unglamorous way. No chandeliers, no gala, no performance. Just the people who actually owned things, gathering to make decisions about what to do with them. My mother had positioned Carter Holdings as a potential equity partner in a waterfront development project, the same one I had seen in Daniel's folders. She was there with Harrison Wade and 2 board members, and I learned afterward that she had expected this to be the moment she reasserted relevance. The meeting where her structural position gave her leverage, where she could demonstrate that whatever chaos her daughter had created in her personal life, the Carter name still carried weight where it mattered. I was not supposed to be there. Daniel had told me, 2 days before, that he had a meeting in Bellevue. He said it mildly, the way he said most things. I asked if I could come. He looked at me for a moment. Yes, he said. Just that. We drove to Bellevue together. Lily was with her grandmother, Daniel's mother, a warm woman named Patricia, who lived in Kirkland, and who had greeted me the first time we met by handing me a piece of pie and saying nothing at all about the strangeness of my situation, which I found deeply kind. We arrived at the hotel. We went to the conference level. And when Daniel walked into the meeting room, I watched something happen that I will carry in my memory for a long time. The room had maybe 30 people in it. Development partners, equity holders, legal representatives, institutional investors. My mother was seated at the far end of the long table with Harrison Wade beside her. She was mid-sentence when we entered, and she stopped, not dramatically, but with the involuntary stoppage of someone who has just seen something they did not expect and cannot immediately categorize. Daniel crossed the room and sat down. Not at the end of the table, not at the periphery. In the middle, across from the lead developer, where the primary equity holder sits. Sonia Reeves was already there, and she slid a portfolio across to him with the efficiency of a long-established partnership. Someone said, "I didn't realize DJM would have a representative here in person. I thought it made sense to be present today," Daniel said. My mother's face went through something I had never seen it do before. Not the contempt of the gala, not the cold management of a conversation she controlled. Something raw. The rearrangement of an entire framework. Because she had done her research after the gala. She had had Daniel investigated. She knew by now who he was. What she hadn't known, what she had calculated wrong, was how much of the waterfront project he controlled. 41%. DJM Capital held 41% of the primary equity structure. Carter Holdings was seeking 7%. The man she had called the repairman was not a guest at this table. He was the largest single voice at it. Daniel opened the portfolio. He asked 2 questions about the development timeline. He made one observation about the financing structure, and then he looked up, across the table, and his eyes met my mother's. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just said, quietly, and without emphasis, "I think we can move forward on the terms as structured. Does anyone have objections?" Nobody did. My mother said nothing. I sat against the wall and watched the woman who had controlled every significant decision of my life for 33 years sit in a room where she had no power. And I felt not triumph, exactly. Something more complicated. Something that had grief in it, and relief, and the specific weariness of having wanted something for a very long time, and finally having it. He didn't say anything about the meeting on the drive back. That was so completely Daniel to do something significant, and then simply continue being himself afterward. As if the gesture and the man were the same thing, and neither needed commentary, I was the one who finally spoke, somewhere on I-90. The lake visible on both sides, in the fading afternoon light. "You could have told her who you were from the beginning," I said. "At the gala." "Any time. Why didn't you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because it wasn't the point." Then what was? A long pause. The kind of pause that isn't hesitation, it's someone choosing words with care because the words matter. "You needed to make a decision without the information changing the decision," he said. "If I'd told you what I had, you wouldn't have known whether you respected me or the portfolio. I didn't want that confusion." I thought about that. And my mother? What she thinks of me is not something I've ever needed to manage. I turned and looked at his profile, the line of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow, the steadiness that had confused me from the beginning because I had mistaken it for passivity, when it was something else entirely. "I owe you an apology," I said. "You don't. I married you as a strategy. I treated you like a—" "You were honest about what it was," he said. I agreed to it. Adults do things for reasons. I'm not owed an apology for a transaction. I entered voluntarily. "Why did you agree to it?" I asked. "Actually, not the practical reasons." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, you were the first person in a long time who talked to me like I was just a person. Not an asset. Not a liability. Not a man to be managed." He paused. "You were cold about it, but you were straight. I've learned to value straight." I looked at the lake. "My mother is going to keep coming," I said. "She doesn't stop. You should know that." "I know. She'll try to find leverage. She'll try to separate me from Emily." He said my name the way he said most things. Simply, without performance. "I'm not going anywhere." "Not because of her." "Why not?" He glanced at me briefly. "Because Lily asks where you are when you're not home." I felt that sentence in my chest, somewhere behind my sternum, in the place where things settle that you didn't know you needed to hear. I turned back to the window. The lake stretched out wide and gray and enormous on both sides of the bridge, and the sky was doing something spectacular with the clouds, turning orange at the edges, and I thought, This is what I didn't plan for. We had a conversation that night, after Lily was asleep, that lasted 3 hours. It started in the kitchen, and moved to the porch, and ended sitting on the steps in the cool spring dark, both of us with cups of tea that had gone cold, talking about things we hadn't said out loud before. He told me about Claire, really told me, this time. Not just the fact of her death, but who she had been. Funny, exacting, the kind of person who had strong opinions about film scores and made incredibly good risotto, and had left a hole in the world shaped specifically like herself. I told him about my father, who had died when I was 26, and who had been the only person in my family who ever made me feel like my choices were mine to make. I told him that my mother's control had intensified after the funeral, and that I had been fighting it in the wrong ways for years. Small rebellions that cost me energy without changing anything until the married idea, which was, I admitted, the largest and least sophisticated rebellion I had ever staged. Did it work? He asked. It backfired completely, I said. I accidentally married someone I respect. He looked at me, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't let myself see before. Hadn't let myself see because seeing it would have required admitting how much I had been looking. That's a complicated problem, he said. What are you going to do about it? I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. You have no idea what you've done to yourself. I thought about Lily's drawing of the big building. I thought about the lamp on the desk in the small room he'd prepared for me. I think, I said slowly, that I'm going to stop treating this like a transaction. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile, more like the precursor to one. That was the agreement. Agreements can be renegotiated, I said. They can. Are you? I stopped. Started again. Would you want that? He looked at me directly. And this time, he didn't look away. Yes, he said. Just that. Clear and uncomplicated. I nodded. I looked at the garden, at the neighbor's sunflowers just visible above the fence. The night was cold and smelled like rain coming. I should probably call my mother, I said. Probably. She's not going to take this well. She's going to be angry for a long time. I'm going to choose you anyway, I said. And I heard myself say it and realized it was the most precise sentence I had said in a very long time. Not choose this arrangement. Not choose this situation. You, this specific person who had made coffee when I needed truth, and who had carried a small girl through a parking lot after a wedding, and who had sat in a room full of people who underestimated him and said exactly 2 sentences, controlled the entire outcome. I know, he said. And then, quietly, I've been waiting for you to figure that out. My mother did not fold quickly. She was not built for quick folding. She made 3 more attempts over the following weeks. A formal letter from Harrison Wade, asserting concerns about the validity of the marriage, a conversation with Carter Holdings' board about Emily's personal instability, and a dinner invitation to which she invited Preston Hargrove, who had in fact not moved on to anyone, and sat across the table from me with the air of a man who has been told there's been a mistake and has arrived to confirm it. I was very kind to Preston Hargrove. He was not a bad man. He was simply the wrong one. And I said so, gently, and without room for revision. Then I went home to Daniel's house. Our house. I had started to think of it that way. The shift happened the way real shifts happen, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small ones. Each so ordinary, it was barely noticeable until you looked back and saw how far you'd traveled. It happened in the evenings when Lily asked me to read to her and I said yes. It happened in the Sunday mornings when Daniel made breakfast and I sat at the kitchen table and the 3 of us occupied the same space with the ease of people who had learned each other. It happened in the particular silence of a household that is not performing love, not performing normalcy, just existing in the honest shape of what it actually was. Daniel restructured DJM Capital's public presence gradually, in his own way, on his own timeline, not as a revelation, but as a quiet normalization meetings attended in person more often. His name attached to projects more visibly, Sonia Reeves making introductions he no longer deflected. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The Pacific Northwest real estate world is not large, and people who needed to know had always known. My mother knew. She called me on a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the Bellevue meeting. And she was quiet in a different way than she had been quiet before. Not the quiet of a withheld weapon. The quiet of someone reassessing. He's not what I thought he was, she said. No, I agreed. He could have corrected my impression at any point. A pause. Why didn't he? He doesn't perform for people who haven't earned his time, I said. She was silent for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, and underneath the breathing, the faintest sound of something complicated happening. Are you happy? She asked finally, and something in the way she asked it, stripped of the usual architecture of agenda, made it sound like a real question. I'm becoming, I said. Which is better than pretending. She called again the following Sunday. This time she asked to come for dinner. I talked to Daniel about it. He said, without irony, of course. Then, I'll make enough for 4. She might be difficult. She's your mother, he said. And she's Lily's grandmother. She's not, I stopped. Lily hasn't met her. She could. I thought about that. I thought about my mother sitting in this small craftsman kitchen, with its old appliances and its view of someone else's sunflowers. Across the table from a man she had publicly dismissed, eating a meal he had made. I thought about the distance between that image and the woman in gray Chanel at my wedding, her jaw set, watching the vase fall. She'll have to apologize to you, I said. She doesn't owe me an apology, Daniel said. She thought what she thought. She was wrong. That happens. He poured water into a glass and handed it to Lily, who had appeared at his elbow. What matters is what comes after. Dinner was a Sunday in May. The porch had been repaired by then. Daniel had fixed the sagging section himself on a Saturday afternoon, while Lily supervised and I brought them both lemonade. The backyard had been planted with something modest and orderly. The house looked like what it was, a home. My mother arrived in a car she drove herself. She stood at the front door in a blue dress that was not Chanel, not armor, not the curated signal of a woman performing power. Just a blue dress. Her hair was down. I had never seen my mother arrive anywhere with her hair down. She shook Daniel's hand. She looked at him carefully, with the directness she had always had, but this time stripped of contempt. Something else in it. An assessment that was trying to be honest. I understand you're good with numbers, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. When they matter. Lily appeared and stared at my mother with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to disguise interest. My mother looked at her, and something happened in her face, a door opening that I had almost forgotten was there. You must be Lily, my mother said. You're Emily's mom, Lily said. I am. Lily considered this. Your hair is pretty, she said. My mother, Vivienne Carter, architect of strategies and merger of interests, and woman who ate grapefruit for collagen, looked genuinely surprised. And then she smiled. A real one. Not curated, not deployed. Just a smile. Thank you, she said. We ate dinner at the kitchen table. All 4 of us, with the window open because the evening was warm. The conversation was careful at first, and then less careful. And eventually it was just people talking about the neighborhood, about a book Lily was reading, about a building that kept falling down, about a project in South Lake Union that my mother, it turned out, had opinions about. Daniel listened to her opinions with genuine attention. She noticed that he listened. It was not resolution. It was a beginning. Those 2 things looked different. I found Lily in my room one morning, about 2 months after that dinner. I had come upstairs to find a scarf, and she was sitting on the edge of my bed, looking at a photograph I kept on the desk, a photo of my father, taken when he was my age, squinting into the sun somewhere that looked like the coast. Who's that? She asked. My dad, I said. He died when I was younger. She looked at the photo with the grave attention she gave to things. Do you miss him? Every day, I said. She nodded slowly. I miss my mom too, she said. But Daddy says missing people doesn't mean they're gone. It means they were real. I sat beside her on the bed. Outside, I could hear Daniel in the garden, and the sound of birds, and the distant noise of the city doing what cities do, moving, always, forward. That's very wise, I said. Daddy says it, she said. Not me. I looked at the photograph. I thought, this is what real looks like. Not the absence of grief. Not the absence of difficulty. Not the uninterrupted smoothness of a life that has been curated into safety. Real looks like this. A child sitting on a bed, talking about loss without being destroyed by it. A man in a garden who built something enormous and chose to make it small enough to live in. A woman me learning. Late but not too late. The difference between control and choice. Can I call you Mom? Lily asked. Casually, as if she were asking whether I wanted juice. I was not prepared for that question. It went through me the way things do when they hit an undefended place, not painfully, but fully. Like a door opening onto a room you didn't know was there. Yes, I said, you can. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and slid off the bed and went back to whatever she'd been doing. As if it were simple. As if it were the most natural thing. I sat there for a moment, with the photograph and the window light and the sound of the garden. Then I went downstairs to find my husband. Much later, months later, in the winter, with rain against the windows and Lily asleep upstairs and the kitchen warm from something Daniel had been cooking, he told me the full scope of DJM Capital's holdings, not as a revelation, not as a performance, just because we were at a point where we told each other things. It was more than I'd understood from the folders. The waterfront development was one piece. There were commercial properties in 4 neighborhoods, 2 residential developments in permitting, an industrial conversion in Sodu that was 3 years from completion, and several strategic land positions in corridors that everyone in Seattle real estate understood to be the direction the city was moving. The half of Seattle thing, I said. Approximately, he said. That's more than half. Approximately, he said again. I looked at him. He was cutting an apple, very precisely, the way he did everything. He wore a flannel shirt, and his hair needed cutting, and he looked like a man entirely at home in a small kitchen in a house that sagged slightly on one side. What are you going to do with it? I asked. He looked up. What do you mean? With all of it? The portfolio? The visibility? Are you going to? I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, he said. Carefully. On my terms. A pause. Maybe with better input. Better input, I repeated. Financial consultant, he said, and the not-quite smile was there again. Available, I'm told. I considered this for a moment. I'd want to review the full portfolio structure before I agreed to anything, obviously, and I'd have opinions. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Strong opinions. I'm counting on it, he said. Outside, the rain continued. The house was warm. Upstairs, Lily was asleep with her turtle book on the pillow beside her, the one about the house that fell down twice, and was good on the 3rd try. In the morning she would wake up and want pancakes, and ask me 3 questions before I'd had coffee, and tell me something she'd dreamed about with complete seriousness, and I would listen the way her father had taught me to listen. Completely, as if the thing being said deserved the full weight of consideration. I had come into this house as a strategy. I was staying as myself. Whatever self I was, still in the process of becoming. It turned out that the version of me that existed in this kitchen, in this life, with this quietly extraordinary man and his daughter who missed her mother, and called me something that mattered, that version was the most honest one I had found. I passed Daniel the 2nd apple. He cut it in half and put 1 half in front of me without being asked. Outside, Seattle went on being Seattle. Gray and green and rain. Cleaned and full of the kind of buildings that belong to people you'd never suspect. Inside, we were just a family. That was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything.